Hello and welcome. In this episode, I'm going to share stories emailed to me by a subscriber who had a strange creature living in a cellar under her home. Not only did she see the creature, but things in her home would go missing. I'd like to thank Chloe for sharing her stories with me and allowing me to share them with you. For the longest time, she had no idea what this thing could have been, but when she saw one of my episodes about crawlers, it all came rushing back to her. Chloe also lives in Appalachia, which has become known for the strange, bizarre, and downright scary things that happen there, and has shared some of the things she has experienced while living there. She is very interested to hear people's thoughts about her encounters and wants to know if anyone has experienced anything similar. Also, please keep any thoughts and comments respectful. While skepticism is fine, Chloe admits to being a skeptic herself, outright ridicule or anything similar will not be tolerated on this channel. Alright, let's get into today's stories. The first part of Chloe's story involves a creature she now believes to be a crawler while living in her childhood home in southeastern Ohio. As I mentioned in the intro, it wasn't until she saw a crawler video on this channel that she knew what she was dealing with. She says it sent shivers down her spine because she had never heard of any cryptid matching its description. Over the years, she had hoped she just imagined everything that happened. However, she says it's so unnerving seeing that so many people have seen these things. The house she lived in was very old, having been built in 1845. She also says it was super haunted. As I mentioned before, Chloe says she is a very skeptical person and needs science to back stuff up, so it took enduring a lot of experiences to get her to admit she believed what she was seeing. Due to her home being as old as it was, her family didn't have a basement. Instead, they had an externally accessible cellar that had two entrances. One connected to their garage while the other was outside the home, with two doors flat on the ground. The door leading to the cellar from the garage was barred and locked on both sides. The weird things that happened involving the cellar began when she was very young. Possums and raccoons would die down there, which she says is typical, but she and her family chalked it up to natural causes until they realized the flesh would disappear abnormally fast. But they figured that other animals would get down there to naturally dispose of the carcasses. She says here that it just didn't jump out as anything odd at the time. But then things from around her home started going missing. Little toys, trash, and other stuff started going missing only to be found in the cellar. Chloe says this was haunting considering that means something was getting in her home. The external door to the cellar was never locked according to her because there was never anything of value down there. Besides, to gain entrance to the cellar from the garage, the door would need to be unlocked from both sides. Out of all the things she found in the cellar, the creepiest, she says, were toothbrushes. Chloe mentions here that one notable thing about the cellar is that it was nasty. It was the first thing built at her childhood home, had a dirt floor, was damp, dark, and she says with 100% certainty that no one was taking a toothbrush down there to scrub anything. In fact, her mother laughed when she asked if she was using one of her toothbrushes in the cellar. She figured she was using them to clean or something, but her mother wasn't and no one else was either. The toothbrushes that would disappear from inside her home and reappear in the cellar weren't old either. They were ones that she and her brother were actively using and would get in trouble for, quote, losing, only for them to show up months later in the cellar. When they were found down there, they had been used so much and so hard that the bristles were flattened out completely to the sides of the brush, leaving only plastic visible in the middle. Chloe says she can't imagine what could have happened to those toothbrushes for them to be in that state, or for them to just be left in the middle of the dirt floor along with some of her and her brother's toys, as well as toys that belonged to other children from around her neighborhood. These toys included small army men type figures and animal figurines. If all of this wasn't bizarre enough, that's when the tapping under her floor began. It was never in the walls though, and it only happened during the early morning hours. Chloe tried to convince herself it was just the pipes or her very old home adjusting, but she says the tapping seemed almost organic. It was never even, she says, and seemed to pick up at certain times. The first thing she says you might be thinking is it's obviously just the floor adjusting, that nothing could be in the floors. But the thing about the part of the house where she lived was that it was a later addition to the home. To properly set up a foundation, her room had a crawl space under it. It was about 2.5 feet tall and connected to the cellar. When she figured that out, she says her heart sunk. Eventually, she went and investigated, and sure enough, the most stolen items were right underneath where her bed would be, where the tapping would have been taking place. Without any indication it could be anything else, Chloe decided the weird things happening in her home could be attributed to a ghost. She mentions here that this option is less scary than what it really turned out to be. Being that her cellar had a sense of dread to it, and Chloe being into, she says, super scary odd stuff, she loved showing her friends the creepy parts of her property. This would lead to her taking her then boyfriend to the cellar when she was 13 years old. It was October, and she figured it was the perfect time to explore such a spooky and scary location. However, the worst she was expecting was an old dusty possum skeleton, or maybe one of the creepy toothbrushes or toys, which stayed where she found them due to them being absolutely nasty. After arriving at the external doors to the cellar, she began to open them while warning her boyfriend about the very steep, slippery stairs beyond. It would be very dark because the light was in the center of the cellar and turned on by a single chain. As Chloe was pulling the very heavy doors open, she expected nothing but darkness, with her boyfriend holding a flashlight over her shoulder, shining it into the cellar. But once the doors were open, she says she barely had time to respond because this thing is not just crawling up the stairs, but sprinting inhumanly fast. She describes it as long and stretched with pale limbs that look like they shouldn't be able to support it. It had whitish skin with a tinge of gray that barely fit over its bones. Chloe barely had time to even process the face because this creature was moving so fast, but she was able to make out a black gaping mouth with a jaw that looked almost dislocated and black eyes. She does say here that she uses the term eyes loosely because she couldn't tell if it had actual eyes or just empty sockets. That's how black this thing's eyes were. It was moving so fast that the light from the flashlight didn't directly catch its face. But luckily for her and her then boyfriend, this creature struggled to climb the very steep, almost ladder-like stairs. Chloe says the way this thing was running was more like it was skittering than crawling, moving more like a centipede. The legs were uncoordinated and flailing around too violently to be effective in working together to climb the stairs more efficiently. In fact, she says here that because of what she saw that night, she is still scared of centipedes because of how they move. Chloe only saw the creature for a fraction of a second, but says its joints were all wrong, bent at odd angles, almost seemingly backward. She found it incredible that anything with limbs like that, shaped and bent all wrong, could move that fast. Acting quickly before this thing could get up the stairs, she slammed the doors as hard as she could. She thinks it could have been on its way out of the cellar when she opened the doors and was taking the opportunity to either hurt her or run past her. But she was absolutely not going to find out. She didn't even bother to lock the door either, as this thing was moving so fast she was convinced it would just burst right through them anyway if it was determined to get to them. Either that or it would have been able to reach the doors because she wouldn't have been able to lock them in time. At this point, she says she probably looked like a total freak because she doesn't think her boyfriend even saw the creature. He probably just heard the scrambling of feet and hands on the stairs before she slammed the door shut. Being unable to process what she saw, she believes she just blurted out that it was a big raccoon or something. She wasn't paying attention to what she was saying to her boyfriend because she was sure this thing was about to burst out of the cellar and get them. But when she slammed the doors, this thing just stopped. There were no more heavy footsteps, no scrambling, nothing. When the doors closed and this thing was back shrouded in darkness, everything fell completely silent. This is why she was unsure if it was trying to get to them or if she had just scared it. Chloe was positive it was going to hurt her, but then she thought about how it had been stealing her toys, toothbrushes, and other things from the bathroom for years, which meant this creature had gotten uncomfortably close to her and could have even gotten inside her home. It had to have been watching her all those years as she grew up, playing with her toys, brushing her teeth, and doing other things. She even says she always felt like something was watching her and that something about the house felt alive to her. Knowing what she knows now, she attributes those feelings to this creature living in the cellar. Chloe and her now ex-boyfriend never talked about what happened that night, and she still doesn't know for sure if he even saw the thing or if he believed her. She ran in the house afterward and told her mother that something was in the cellar, but her mother just assumed it had to have been an animal. She believed she startled this creature and that if it had wanted to kill her, it would have done so with ease. Besides, what could she have done to defend herself against something that was 7 to 7.5 feet tall, being that she's only 4'11"? Given what it took from her home, it was almost like, according to her, that it wanted to mimic what it saw her doing. After her encounter, nothing happened for a while, but Chloe says it was an uneasy silence. It was almost as if this thing had left. But unfortunately, the tapping would start up again. Only this time, she knew exactly what was doing it. The thought of this thing under her floor tapping brought back all of her anxiety and insomnia much worse than before. Fortunately for Chloe though, she would only have one more big experience, as she puts it, when she moved about 10 minutes away during her sophomore year in high school. Her family bought their new home before selling the old one, which left it sitting empty for some time while it was on the market. Her best friend had never really seen where she grew up due to them becoming friends after the move, and she figured since she had a few things left to retrieve from her old home, she might as well show him around the empty house. He was also curious about her haunting and cryptid stories. The last thing she thought though was that something would actually happen while they were there. The house sat on a hill, which meant the garage and cellar were below ground level. In the family room, there were stairs leading to a parallel hallway that went to the garage. Chloe took her friend down those stairs and reached for the doorknob to open the hallway door, opening it maybe a fourth of the way before they heard what she describes as pounding. It was the sound of very fast footsteps in the hallway parallel to the stairs. Thinking it was maybe a squatter who had gotten in, she slammed the door shut, and just like when she encountered the believed crawler in the cellar, the footsteps just stopped. Neither she nor her friend were thinking it was anything paranormal, so they eventually, while holding hands with hearts racing, worked up the nerve to check it out. They began talking peacefully to whatever was in the hallway, saying it's okay and that they won't be mad. When they got no response, they began clapping, making sounds, etc. They proceeded to check every inch of the hallway, but nothing was in there. They even went into the garage and checked everything, but there was absolutely nothing. The garage door was locked and the door to the cellar was also locked. They assumed for years it was a ghost. However, when she came across this channel and watched the crawler videos, her stomach dropped. Chloe realized the one place her and her friend didn't look was up, and that thing from the cellar could definitely have been perched on the support beams above their heads. They were so freaked out by what happened that they accidentally locked themselves out and had to get another set of keys just to retrieve the other set they left inside the old home. Chloe initially told me she truly thinks that this thing was either lashing out at her for leaving the house or getting scared because it had come to expect the house to be empty, being that it was that way for a year, giving it free reign. However, since she first emailed me her story, she spoke with her friend and he reminded her that the footsteps sounded more like whatever was causing them had shoes on, making them realize it was probably a paranormal event rather than a cryptid encounter. Unless, of course, Chloe says in jest, the crawler had found a pair of shoes and was running around wearing them. Could you imagine a crawler wearing nothing but shoes running around an empty house? After she and her friend had their run-in with whatever this thing was in her old home, Chloe saw an article or two about the area having a very similar creature that was seen crossing a highway near the house, reaffirming for her that she wasn't the only one who had experiences with this thing. Chloe says living in Appalachia, she and her family have experienced a lot of weird things, but nothing has been as odd or scary as what happened to her in her childhood home. And it didn't end there either, as the last encounter she had with this thing was at her new home only 10 minutes away from where she grew up. She was camping in her backyard with her two friends and had told them the story about the encounter at the cellar with this creature scrambling up the stairs. She then went inside for a few minutes only to come back out to her two friends, who she describes both as being 6'3", being absolutely freaked out and angry with her. It turns out that while she was inside, something slammed into the nearby trash cans and ran off. Her friends thought she was pranking them, but she says she would never joke about anything like that. In fact, she hates telling people about the creature because she's scared of people just thinking she's insane or making it up for attention. People often ask her if she made the story up, and she always gives them the same answer. If she was making it up, she would have made it sound a lot more believable. In an update to her first email, Chloe also shares something that happened to her one Christmas that she calls absolutely bizarre. She was around 7 years old at the time and still young enough to believe in Santa Claus. She had gone into her parents' room at about 4 in the morning because she was too excited to sleep, asking her parents if she could go see if Santa had come yet. They said yes, as long as she didn't open the presents, so she ventured out to where the tree was and saw the silhouettes of all the presents there. However, she also saw the silhouette of a figure by the nearby window. Chloe describes it as being tall and gangly. Convinced it was Santa Claus, she froze. The figure froze as well, and they stared at each other in complete silence. She mentions here she could tell it was facing her, but she couldn't make out any features. After a few minutes, she slowly backed away, thinking Santa would be mad at her. Chloe admits that it's pretty obvious that wasn't Santa, but as a child, who else would she think it could have been on Christmas morning? Running back to her parents' room, she excitedly told them that not only had Santa come, but he was still there. They laughed it off due to the early morning hour and not processing what she was telling them at all. But when she kept insisting she saw someone later that afternoon, her parents were convinced someone had been robbing them, and she came out at the exact right time to scare them off. But something about the figure just doesn't sit right with her. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken into. Whoever it was dead silent and seemed to have been caught just checking things out. Chloe ended her first email by saying she sent me her stories because she needed to get it off her chest and wanted to tell someone who would believe her. Also, that finally having a word for the creature that she had so many experiences with growing up makes her feel less crazy. It was almost like she was stalked her whole childhood by this thing and she was the only one who noticed. Even though she had a lot more experiences in her home, mostly paranormal, what happened involving this creature, her stuff going missing, and the tapping made her unable to sleep alone for years, and by the 4th grade she had developed insomnia. She was afraid of not falling asleep before the tapping started because then she would have to acknowledge it, which really took a toll on her mental health. She hadn't talked to her mother about it for years and figured now would be a good time. Her mother told her something she wasn't aware of. The area where she grew up was previously inhabited by the Shawnee people, and about 15 minutes away was an area inhabited by the Hopewell people, which were ancestors of the Shawnee. The place where their house was built has some kind of indigenous settlement on it before the town existed, and when the people who built the home in 1845 excavated, they found a lot of Shawnee pottery and other cultural items. They decided to sell them off to the highest bidder, which she feels like was not the best thing to do. This had her curious if crawlers had any association with previously indigenous land. She says it might just be a weird coincidence, but once she found out the area they dug out for the garage and cellar specifically was where they found the items, it seemed relevant to the story. I'm going to share what I told Chloe. One of the first things I told her was that I believed her. I see what she said so much in so many stories I read. People turning to the internet to post their stories online just to get it off their chest and have someone who actually believes them hear it. I had my own paranormal encounter that is often met with skepticism when I tell people, so I know how she feels. As for her story, to think that this thing was living under her home for so many years and even came into her house is beyond disturbing. I definitely think it was a crawler. There are so many crawler encounters that take place near caves, old mining tunnels, or somewhere similar. It makes sense to me that it would choose a dark, dank hole in the ground to make its home. Also, the way she described it moving along with the physical description and the height solidify it being a crawler for me. That and what she said about being stalked and watched her whole life. I don't doubt that it could have followed her either. I've also heard stories where they become infatuated with someone and follow them. One of my earliest crawler videos is about a girl who had one follow her from city to city across Australia. The locations weren't even that close to each other either, so 10 minutes away would be nothing. I just can't get over the fact that it was in her house and in the crawl space right under her bedroom too. I would have also had problems sleeping. That's very creepy. The toys and toothbrushes went missing only to be found in the cellar, but I guess it would take them back to its lair. I'm curious about it taking the toothbrushes though. Maybe it saw her using one and was curious itself about them. That's still very bizarre and weird. As for her Christmas encounter, of course, as a child she would think she saw Santa. But that's pretty scary. She saw that thing inside her house. Given her description of the silhouette, it sounds like the same creature to me. It could also explain how it got its hands on her toothbrushes and toys. To think it was moving around in her home at night being that quiet is very unsettling. Believe it or not, she isn't the only person to see a cryptid in her home. There are a lot of stories I've included in episodes and ones I've heard where people have encounters in their home. What do you think about what Chloe went through during her childhood? Being that this recording has gotten so long, I'm going to do something I normally don't do, and I'm going to end this part of Chloe's story here and share her Appalachia experiences in part 2. Remember when sharing your thoughts about her story to do so respectfully. Chloe is eager to hear what people think, and definitely let her know if you've experienced something similar. Also, be sure to come back to hear part 2 about her experiences living in Appalachia. And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put it in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an episode. Even if you'd prefer that I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. And please remember to keep it civil in the comments section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.